I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 192 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today, my friends, we are talking about decisions. I am airing an Encore episode today, and I'm doing that. This is what I do when I need to take a little time away from the microphone. And what I always do is go back through our archives and look for episodes that I think have topics that are relevant right now based on what I am hearing from our community, from the women I'm coaching, from the women who are, commenting on the podcast or commenting on Tea Time. And also I think about what were some of the most listened to, most helpful episodes, that we got comments and feedback on when they aired originally. So that's how I arrived at this topic around decision making. And it is a perennial difficulty. So many of us know that we struggle to make decisions. And honestly, sometimes we're just not sure why. So in this episode, I share a little bit about why decisions are difficult. And, the absence of frameworks for decision making is sometimes one of the biggest challenges. So I'm going to give you a framework in this episode that you can try for making decisions. It's one that has been super powerful for me. It's worked really well with a lot of the women I've coached over the years, and I hope it'll be helpful to you as well. So whether this episode is brand new to you and you have never heard it, or whether you heard it before, but you're in a new place, the decisions you're facing today are different than the decisions you may have been facing when you heard it originally. And it may land for you with a new piece of insight. I know that happens to me all the time with books that I go back to, or, videos or TED Talks or podcasts that I listen to again, and I get a new insight that's relevant for this moment in time. So without further ado, here is the Encore episode of Can't Make a Decision. Try this. I have to tell you, I kind of love this topic, but there's a crazy reason why, and that's that I used to be really terrible at making decisions. So much so that sometimes I didn't even recognize when I was facing one. Like I just wanted to stick my head in the sand and pretend there wasn't a decision to be made. I was a massive overthinker. That was the primary problem I had. And we're going to talk about that and the other things that might be getting in the way of your ability to make decisions quickly and with confidence, and give you a framework for how you can move forward today. And it's important because decisions are something we face every single day. Lots of little, seemingly inconsequential decisions like what we're going to have for dinner or lunch, or what we're going to wear that day, or what shampoo to buy at the store. But sometimes really big, momentous decisions that we're staring down that really hold the potential to change the course of our lives if we let them. So today we're going to dig in and talk all about all things decisions. Really 3 pieces of this framework that I want to make sure we get to today. So just so you can have a mental model to follow here. First, we're going to talk about how do you recognize when you need to make a decision? What are the signs or the signals that might be the right next step? And then second, what are the things that might be keeping you from making a decision that you're facing? What's keeping you stuck in analysis paralysis or some other reason that you're not actually deciding and moving forward? And then third, how do you get yourself unstuck so that you can get to the other side of the decision and experience the momentum that brings? All right. So first up is, how do you know when you need to make a decision? What are the signals or the signs or the symptoms that you might be experiencing? And I think to answer this, we have to talk first about what a decision does. So I think any decision that you make is really the catalyst for a chain of events. It's causal, right? It causes a whole chain of events to get kicked off or to take place. It sets like a course of action forward. So when you realize that you're not taking action, that you're not in that chain of events, you probably have a decision to make. It's often something people will describe to me as feeling stuck, right? I just feel stuck here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving forward. And think about it. At that point, you're really being governed by the law of inertia. So we're going to go back to physics. Simplified, an object in motion will stay in motion, but an object at rest will stay at rest unless it's acted upon by an outside force, right? That's a simplification of the law of inertia. So in this case, that force, that outside force that needs to act upon you to get you in motion is a decision. So when you find yourself not taking action, especially when you're not taking the actions you really know you want to take or need to take, like you're not exercising, right? And you're not maybe decluttering, or you're not saving for retirement or for the kids' college educations, or you're not looking for the job that you'd actually love. It's because you haven't decided to yet. You may be toying with it. You might be thinking about it, pondering it, right? But if you're not taking action, you haven't actually decided. So at this point today, I want you to just take a minute and ask yourself, where am I stuck in not taking action? And what decision would I need to make to get things moving, right? To get myself moving in a positive direction. You may even want to pause the episode and just give that a moment of thought before you come back, because as you go through the rest of this episode, I want you holding that decision in mind. I want you thinking about the particular decision facing you and what's on the other side of it. Now, by the way, these could be yes or no decisions, right? Am I going to do it or not? They also could be which decisions, WHICH, right? Which one decisions. And sometimes it's a combination of both. So a yes or no decision would be, should I leave my job, right? Yes, I should leave. No, I should not leave. But the which decision is, which new job would I apply for? Or which business would I start? Okay, you see how that works? So sometimes it's not really a yes or no decision. It's a which decision that's facing you. And those can be candidly more complicated because that's where things start to become very specific. And sometimes they're sequenced. So let's go back to that example I just gave. The first decision is yes or no, am I going to leave my job? Right? You actually don't need to know which new job you're going to apply for in order to make that first decision. But it's quickly going to follow on the heels, right? You're going to quickly start asking yourself, well, okay, if I do quit my job, what job am I going to apply for next? Or what business am I going to start? Or how am I going to make a living? Okay. So get your decision in mind. Think about the thing that's facing you that you're maybe have been putting off. And let's look next here at why you may not have already made that decision. Why might that be? And before you just say, well, I'm just not good at making decisions, which I really don't love that language because that is a label, that's an identity marker that you are slapping on yourself and carrying around with you, right? I'm just not somebody who's good at making decisions means you've made it an identity. And I would rather you view it as a skill that you haven't mastered yet, right? I traditionally have taken a long time when I needed to make a decision. I traditionally have felt less comfortable or confident when I was facing a decision. That's a feeling that you've had, but not necessarily an identity marker, okay? So let's look at some reasons why you may not already have made this particular decision that is in your lap. There are 5 of these, 5 reasons that as I was prepping for today's episode, I came up with that in my work with the women at Brilliant Balance, right, when I'm coaching someone or mentoring someone through these decisions that they're making, typically around midlife, right, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, these are the 5 things I see the most often that cause that decision paralysis. The first one is overwhelm. And what I mean by that is there are just too many options and too many branches on the decision tree. And because of that, you're kind of chasing yourself around, chasing your tail, right? Around and around within those options. And it's just starting to feel like you're never going to be able to decide. Back when I was working at Procter & Gamble and working on consumer products, one of the principles that I thought was so fascinating about consumer behavior was when we have too many choices, it actually shuts down our decision-making, right? There's kind of an optimal number of choices to present someone with. Too few and they start to feel like, I don't really like any of these. Too many, and candidly, it's just overwhelming and we won't make a decision at all. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to get out of these patterns, but really pay attention to, have you maybe opened the net a bit too wide? If overwhelm is setting in and there's just too many options and branches on the decision tree. That is most often going to correlate with those which decisions, right? Which one should I choose? Because that's where we can really get into list generation and having many, many paths forward. The second thing that can cause decision paralysis is fear. So this is really the story you're telling yourself about what could go wrong, what could happen. And fear will block you from making a decision because it protects you. It's protective to say, if I just stay right here where I am, even if I'm unhappy, even if I'm miserable, at least I know what I'm dealing with, right? Kind of the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And so on the other side of a decision, there may be a bit of unknown. And that can cause fear to rise up, and that fear can keep you from making the decision that would let you move forward. All right. Third thing that I see all the time with our audience of women is perfectionism. And perfectionism, I would describe it as, I can't bear the thought of making the wrong decision. What if I make the wrong decision? I'm better off just not making any decision at all, rather than dealing with the awful thought that I may make the wrong decision, that someone won't agree with me, that I will change my mind, that I will realize later there was a better option. So all the things that tangle us up around perfectionism can really keep you stuck and keep you from moving forward. So let's use an example like exercise, which I mentioned earlier. The perfectionist angle on this is, if I don't have exactly the right gym for exactly the right monthly fee, that's exactly the right distance from my house, where I have exactly the right schedule of classes, then I can't do it at all. And so that level of exactitude can really keep us from doing anything at all, making any choice at all. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. All right, that was 3 so far: overwhelm, fear, and perfectionism. The fourth thing that can cause decision paralysis is risk aversion. So this is the one facet of fear, maybe, that what if something bad happens because of the decision that I made? What if it's not 100% guaranteed that I will succeed in this course of action? So our aversion to risk can keep us from making a choice where there's a bit of an unknown still off in the future. It might work, but it might not. And the fact that it might not is causing us to say, I can't make that decision yet. So we're really trying to work through an equation where we've mitigated that risk down to 0, which, by the way, almost never happens, right? Unless we're playing really small and safe. And so that's another one that I see a lot, very prevalent, that our risk aversion keeps us from making decisions. And then the fifth factor that sometimes causes decision paralysis is the absence of a deadline, right? This is the classic, I'll think about it later pattern, where we're just lying to ourselves, right? We're telling ourselves, I'll decide later. And what this one often leads to, right? When there's no deadline, what this often leads to is what I would call an undecision or a decision by default, which means time elapses and eventually the door closes and it's kind of decided for us. So, not having a deadline can feel good in the short term. It can feel like, oh, thank goodness I have time to think about this and there's no pressure. But we also lose like the impetus for action when there's no deadline. So those 5 things, overwhelm, fear, perfectionism, risk aversion, and the absence of a deadline, they're kind of like the 5 horsemen of the apocalypse here. These are the harbingers of doom when it comes to making a decision. And so if you want to make the decision, that you called to mind earlier in this episode, and you want to kick off that positive chain of events, then we have to figure out how to counteract these 5 forces. All right. So I put some thought into what are the things I see women doing? What do I do when I need to move through a decision, even in the face of some of those emotions? And so here they are. The first thing, and this is so powerful, I can't even tell you. The first thing is limit information overload. Okay. So I mentioned earlier when I was thinking about the number of choices to give somebody in store, right? Back in my Procter & Gamble days, maybe they're shopping for laundry detergent or shampoo, right? What are the optimal number of choices to give them? Because you don't want to cross over that point where you have too much information. It's one of those really like dumb tricks that our brains pull on us is they will just shut down when there is too much information. And we start overemphasizing pieces of information that don't actually matter. Okay. So we as humans really dislike uncertainty. Uncertainty implies risk, right? Or danger. And so when we don't feel like we have all the information, we feel uncertain. And so when we're missing a piece of data or when we're just overloaded with data, we start feeling like this decision is riskier than it actually is. All right. So I have certainly reached the point where I had too much information, too many facts in front of me, and it makes it hard to make a decision. I think a classic example here is searching for something, trying to shop for something online. Back in the days when you would walk into one store and you had to buy, a coat, and there were 10 coats and you picked one, that was a very different process than now where we could buy a coat from anywhere in the world, from any website, practically have it shipped to us in 48 hours from anywhere. The amount of processing that we're doing in our minds to try to get to the right option is just enormous. So one thing that can really help is setting like a time limit on your searching so that you just limit your information. Like I'm going to get 3 good options in front of me and I am going to choose among them instead of I am going to meticulously evaluate every option that I could possibly think about and really try to have a data-based reason for choosing one over the other, right? Especially when the stakes of the decision are not super high, it is really helpful to just say, I'm going to limit the amount of information I take in, right? I'm going to get a few options and I'm going to pick one and move forward. That's a little bit harder to do when you're making life-altering decisions, but the principle really does still apply. And I think a really big reason that I see women spinning their wheels for months and sometimes years on key decisions is they just keep thinking, if I keep getting more information, eventually the right answer is going to reveal itself. And unfortunately, it's just not the case. Okay? So limit the amount of information to keep yourself out of overwhelm. The second thing that's really helpful when you want to move into action is to get your emotions out of it. So our emotions really cloud our decision-making capability, specifically the ones connected to fear and perfectionism, okay? So if you can get your emotions out of the picture, quell that fear, right? Quiet down that perfectionism, you are going to make faster, more confident decisions. They'll be more data-driven, right? And you'll just have to have a tolerance in here that you're building. Like it's the narrative in your mind should be, I'm building a tolerance for holding this fear and acting anyhow. I'm building a tolerance for imperfect action that gets me in motion, right? So I can start to experience what's on the other side of the decision. So practicing, and there's so many ways we talk about this inside of coaching. I can't get into all of them today, but practicing ways to get your emotions out of it so that you can make the decisions with a clear mind and make them faster is huge. The third thing I would think about when you really want to get into action is setting a deadline or a time limit. This is immensely powerful. It's sort of connected to what I was talking about in terms of limiting the amount of information, because if you think about it, a deadline or a time limit will almost inherently limit your information intake. But telling yourself like, I'm going to book a plane ticket, right? I have to book this plane ticket. I'm going to give myself 20 minutes to do some research on the best itinerary and the best pricing, and then I'm going to book the ticket, right? Instead of I'm going to spend 3 weeks continuing to cycle back through these search engines trying to find a better one. Or, I've seen people do this over a water bottle. Like it doesn't have to be a big momentous decision like where, you're going to hold your wedding or where your child's going to go to college. These are small decisions that we are spending inordinate amounts of time trying to make. So setting a deadline or a time limit and saying at the end of that amount of time, I am going to take an action. And here's what's really helpful with that. It kind of leads me to my fourth point is recognize reversibility. Recognize that most decisions, many decisions are reversible. And this is true with bigger and smaller decisions that we put so much weight on them because we think once I make this decision, I am never going to be able to unmake it. And the truth is you almost always can. Yes, moving across the country to a new city to take a job is a big deal, but it's also totally reversible if it turns out not to be as great as you thought. If it doesn't turn out great, you move again, and the world does not come to an end. I've had this discussion with people about which school to enroll their children in. They will let you change schools. So while it might not be ideal, if it creates the freedom to get moving and then know that if I have to make a change, I'll make a change, right? So many things in life that we categorize as, wow, this is a forever and irreversible decision, in fact, are not. And I think that holding that principle in mind as you're trying to make the first decision can be so powerful. So let's just look at those 4 tactics again on how to get yourself out of decision paralysis and look at how they knit together. So the first one was limit information overload, right? So you don't want to have as many options in front of you. And then get your emotions out of it, especially fear and perfectionism. One way to do that is setting a deadline or a time limit and recognize the reversibility of your decisions. Okay, so whenever you are feeling stuck, especially on the decision you called to mind earlier today, you have to know what, so here's the thing. I said earlier today, but in any case, you have to know what is the next decision that you need to make, right? You thought of one today, but this will not be the last one. There will be other times where you notice this pattern of, I'm stuck, I'm not moving forward, I'm not taking action, right? So figure out what is the decision at hand. Is it a yes or no decision, or is it a which, some kind of which set of choices decision? And figure out which one of those analysis paralysis problems is keeping you stuck, and then apply these principles I shared today to actually make the decision and get yourself back into an action cycle where you can build some momentum. This one skill is like a key that unlocks the next level of you, right? Your ability to make decisions faster and with more confidence really does unlock new levels of life for you. Here's the other thing it does. It gives you time back. Virtually everyone who listens to this podcast is struggling with, I have too much to do and not enough time to do it. Just think of the power of the time that you could get back if you could make these decisions faster. right? All the time that you're spending Googling options and Amazon searching options and writing out long lists of analysis, if all of that time, or a big chunk of that time, came back to you to apply to actually executing the decision, what would that make possible? I want you to really sit with that as you take in, your takeaways from this episode. And here's the thing. Decision making is huge. It's going to unlock a lot for you when you start to put into practice what I shared today. But I will also tell you, it's not going to be 100% smooth sailing. Sometimes just getting yourself to make the decisions feels like you're flying into a strong headwind. And once you've made the decision, it's not always like, oh, the angels sing and the doors open and, you have there's no further challenges. Sometimes it gets even harder after you've made the decision. And I used to think when that would happen that it meant I'd made the wrong decision. I was doing something wrong. It had gotten challenging. But I've come to embrace that force as a sign that I'm on exactly the right track. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about resistance and how you can learn to embrace resistance to really make immense progress. So I hope you'll join me for that episode. To make sure that you do, the best thing to do is take a second and subscribe to this podcast. If you haven't done that already, super easy to do from wherever you are listening. Just click that subscribe button, and then the new episodes will be added to your feed. And if you would have 2 minutes to leave a rating and review for the show, I would love it. It really helps us get this podcast in front of new listeners and just takes a minute. Like, here is a great one that we just got from Lashes by Megan that just made my day. She said, wow, I've only listened to 3 episodes, yet I've shared this with all my friends and the girls in the family. Truly brilliant nuggets throughout each minute of each episode. I've never been so inspired by someone's words and perspective and ways to break down areas in our lives that I know everyone faces. Thank you for your wisdom and sharing your knowledge. My best friends are already on board with a bi-weekly deep dive into pursuing and achieving balance. Love. So that made my day. Thank you so much for sharing it. If you have a moment to just tell me your thoughts on the podcast, I would love to hear from you and to share your words with our listeners. That's all for today, rock stars. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.